Starting live.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Veterans in Politics candidate interviews for Nevada State Assembly. We are about to start with District 12. I would like to thank our sponsors, Ron Q for Clark County Treasurer, Michael Broadway Real Estate, Real Water, and Lakeside Business Suites. My name is Alexis Plunkett. I'm a Nevada criminal defense attorney, and I would like to give the panel a moment to introduce themselves.
Mantis, Toboggan, Veterans in Politics radio host.
Robert Foust, US Army.
Geraldi US Marine.
Now I would like to give our candidate an opportunity to take about a minute and introduce us to you and tell us a little about your background.
Yes. I'm Annette Levy. I am running for Assembly in District 12. As you all know, the Assembly is where laws are drafted, argued, and passed. I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and I've been an arbitrator and a mediator, and I've had my own law firm for the last 18 years, so I feel I'm qualified for that responsibility. But more than that, I'm a mother of 4, so I understand the need that we need to fix our schools here in Nevada. I am also a cancer survivor, and I took care of my elderly father before he passed, and I also have twins, which is considered high risk, so I understand the need for affordable, quality health care. And I also believe strongly that Nevada can be a shining star for alternative energy, and I would love to see us be #1 in solar in the state. So with that, I welcome any questions you may have.
Hey, Geraldi. Do you support, or let me retract that. Are you for banning semi-automatic assault? Are you for banning semi-automatic assault weapons?
I am. I don't believe in automatic assault weapons in the hands of civilians in cities. I don't know what the use of them is. I am not for banning guns or repealing the Second Amendment. I believe very strongly as a Jew, and given that the Jews survived the Holocaust somehow, despite how horrible that was, one of the first things the government did in Germany was take away guns, so I don't believe in that. But I do believe that common sense measures to keep guns out of the hands of teenagers, and I consider an 18-year-old to be right there as a teenager, even though they're an adult. I think we should keep guns out of their hands, and I think we should use common sense measures to minimize violence with guns.
Robert Faust, thank you for being here today, Annette. I'd like to ask you to briefly describe your district and what do you think is the biggest problem in your district and what would you do about it?
My district runs the gamut. We have about 67,000 people in it. We have about 59% is white, about 35% Hispanic, and the rest is a mix. And I think one of the main problems we have is our education system. Our schools are not great on the east side. My district is the very far east side, Sunrise Mountain, as well as far east Henderson and Lake Las Vegas. I think our infrastructure needs help. I think our streets need help. Some of our roads have not been repaved in almost 30 years, if you can imagine that. So there's no excuse for that. We have streets in my district that go about halfway down the block and then turn into dirt, even though homes are on the side of the dirt part. So for those people to reach their homes, they have to drive over dirt. And that's not intentional and shouldn't be happening. So I think our schools, safety issues are big, and our infrastructure.
Mantis, Toboggan. Do you have any strategies for improving healthcare for your district and for all of Las Vegas?
I think there's several prongs to this. We have to make sure that there's sufficient competition in the marketplace. We have to make sure that prescription drug costs are kept at a reasonable level instead of astronomical, even though they can save lives. We cannot put profit before lives. We need to look at a whole host of things, including maybe putting some of it in government hands and some of it may not be. But we need to have choices for sure, and we need to have competition.
Jay Geraldi, are you for the redistriction, hopefully I said that right, the redistriction of voting demographics? And if so, why? Or why not?
I don't feel I know enough about the redistricting to figure out what exactly the plan is. I would say this: whenever there is a plan that tries to gerrymander around to increase votes for one party versus another, it's a bad idea. Every district should have as good a mix as possible of all types of parties. So I would take a look at that and see what the goal is and just how far-fetched it is.
Robert Foust. Annette, how do you feel about the privatization of the Veterans Affairs Administration?
I think we need to be cautious when it comes to privatizing government work. The prisons have been privatized on occasions, and there have been big problems with that, in that private companies are profit-motivated and profit-minded, whereas government, as we know, is not. That's a good and bad. On the bad side, we tend to run deficit. On the good side, we tend to put people before the profits. So I would be very cautious on making VA private. I would, though, be in favor of, if any veteran wants to go to a private healthcare provider, that they be able to do that. And so I am very much pro-choice in that regard and pro-competition, but I'm not in favor of privatizing government work.
Mantis, Toboggan. You've previously run for judgeship. Is that something that you would possibly pursue during an assembly term? If not, what about an assembly position would keep you there?
When I ran for judge, I did so on the belief that I could make changes, positive impact on people's lives, and I could. That is my training. Like I said, I've been an arbitrator, mediator, lawyer for decades, and I also have been a pro tem judge, temporary judge in LA County for 11 years. That's my training. That's where I tend to go to try to make changes. But after that, as I gave it more thought, I thought any changes I could make as a judge, which would obligate me to follow the law, and I would be minimal, if any. So the best way to do that is to run for the legislature where I can make a direct impact and I can have a voice. Because running for judge, people would ask me, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I always have to say the same thing, which is I would follow the law, and if you want the laws to change, you need to go to petition the legislature. But at this point, you can ask me what I think about something and I'll tell you straight out, because I have found my voice and I find it actually very liberating to run for the assembly versus for a judicial position.
Jay Geraldi, provide us the demographic area, District 12, that you are representing or looking to represent, and can you tell us one or two items that you feel passionate about that you'd like to see a change if you were to seat Assembly District 12?
As I mentioned, demographically, there are about 1/3 are service-oriented folks, 1/3 Hispanic. Where geographically?
Yes,
Geographically is the far east side, Frenchman's Mountain. It's called Sunrise Mountain also. So it's a very far east side. I live literally on the mountain. And it comes down to about Sloan. It goes down a little bit, and then Lake Las Vegas and the far east of Henderson. And as I mentioned, I think safety issues, school issues, labor, and infrastructure are the main problems there, and I would champion those to make the east side a better place to live.
Robert Foust. Annette, where do you stand on supporting Planned Parenthood? Would you support it or would you not support it, and why?
I used Planned Parenthood when I was in college, and I did it because on my own as a student, I didn't have money to go to a private physician, and I certainly wasn't going to go to my parents who are, my father's from Egypt, my mother's from Lebanon. I'm not going to go to them and tell them that I would like to become an adult. And so I went to Planned Parenthood, and they were absolutely invaluable to me. I recently learned from my now adult 3 daughters that each of them did the same, and I wasn't aware of it at the time. Now, none of us had abortions. We all went there for basic feminine health care, and I have to say I was very impressed with them and very grateful to them. On the issue of choice, abortion, I believe in a woman and family's right to choose, and I have raised 4 children, so I understand the sensitivities of it, but I also understand that what happens when you outlaw abortion is that the wealthy and privileged will travel out of the country or out of state and get the abortions they want, and the poor and underprivileged will go to the back alleys, to the doctors who use a hanger and get their abortions in ways that may very well end up killing them. And that's what has happened in the past before abortions became legal, and that's what will happen again. So saying you're outlawing abortion and saying you're outlawing all drugs and saying you're outlawing certain other things that people will do anyway, I think is just asking for a lot more trouble and death and pain, human suffering, than necessary.
Mantis Toboggan. With increasing housing costs and anticipated population growth, do you have any thoughts on how we can handle the homeless problem and possibly increasing the homeless problem?
I am all for, as part of the affordable health care that I want to see implemented in Nevada, that would include mental health issues. And a lot of the homeless problem is not just due to, as you know, not just due to money, lack of money. There are many times when we have wonderful organizations that offer housing to people who choose not to take it. They choose the homeless lifestyle for the camaraderie, for whatever other reasons. But much of that is also due to mental illness. We have got to get our arms around the mental illness problems and start cleaning this up. It's a shame, it's unexcusable that we don't recognize mental illness the way we should. If someone goes in and has a heart problem, we fix it. No stigma attached to that. Someone goes in and has a broken leg, no stigma attached to that. But boy, if you've got something, a chemical imbalance, there's so much stigma, even if you're taking medication and it's working. It's really appalling that this is where we're at this point in 2018 in our country.
I'd like to touch on the abortion issue a little bit. There's I would say women that have the recording of their abortion procedure, and they would like to play it on or display it on YouTube, but it keeps getting blocked or taken down. I've seen the abortion procedure, and it changed me when I saw the penknife and the baby trying to grab it and trying to juke and move from being stabbed, and then open its mouth, but you can't really hear anything, screaming, and then you see the blood coming out when he's stabbed, or he or she. Would you would you support these women that want to have their procedure that was recorded being shown on YouTube? Or oppose it, and why?
I have not seen the videos, and I would always caution that any kind of video would need to be verified first, but assuming that it's legitimate, I want to be real clear as a mom of four and as a potential legislator, I don't believe in late-term abortions, and I don't believe in once a child is viable like that, that they be terminated, I think is horrendous. But early term, I understand it. Now, all of it I don't like. I don't like it, but what I'm saying is, if you outlaw it, it will cause more problems than if you don't. I don't like it. I have my kids. I would never give any of them up, and I would never abort any of them.
So would you support their right or their decision to have it played on YouTube, for example, not blocked?
I am wholly in favor of free speech and the free flow of information. I would support it being shown on YouTube. Let the marketplace of ideas win people's minds and hearts. I don't believe in censorship.
Robert Foust. Annette, would you support the family court going to a tribunal as opposed to juries or to the one judge party? And if you would support it, would you consider introducing legislation to create a tribunal for family courts?
Absolutely. I think it's so necessary. On the one hand, you hate to see families torn apart by litigation. On the other hand, as I say, it's going to happen. So what you do is you try to minimize the pain that you cause to families and the arbitrariness of having something so personal as a child be taken away from you by having a panel. I prefer a panel to a jury. I prefer a panel. I sit on the ethics committee for attorneys so that when attorneys are accused of doing something wrong, we've got a panel, we listen to the evidence, we listen to both sides. If we can do that for attorney malfeasance, we can certainly do it to keep families intact and families from being further hurt. So I'm all in favor of it. And I don't like the idea of one judge and one person having that final say when it comes to the children.
Mantis Toboggan. It looks like Marcy's law will definitely pass, but where do you stand on it, and do you think we need further legislation for victims' rights? And is there anything that you would propose?
I believe that victims should know when their attackers are being let out of jail. They should be kept apprised of where people are who have caused them problems in the past. That, I think, is a key issue. Victims are often left in the dark. The administrations, the criminal authorities don't tell them what's going on, and sometimes that person comes back into their lives. I also believe that they need to be kept informed to the fullest extent that they want to be kept informed as to what's going on. The prosecutor does represent the people, doesn't represent the victim in particular, but without that victim, they don't have a case. And the whole point of it is that we can all, as a society, look at that victim and say, that could have been me. So give that victim a voice, because it's as if you're giving me a voice should it happen to me. So I'm all for maximizing victims' rights. I'm all for also making sure that the defendant's rights are not violated. I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, and I uphold it 1,000,000%. And that's part of also why I don't believe in repealing the Second Amendment.
Jay Geraldi, would you vote for or against legislation that would hold our judiciary accountable if they were to legislate from the bench and vote in violation of any of our constitutional rights?
It would depend on what happened, but I can tell you as a general rule, I don't believe in holding judges liable for civil penalties or liabilities. We have methods in place that address this. You can appeal to a higher court. You can file a complaint with the Judicial Disciplinary Commission. But once you start suing judges, you're going to have a problem, because judges will be afraid to legislate, and they will be afraid of finding one way or another. And there's already enough pressure on judges to tune out all the unpopular pressures, they get because an issue is unpopular or a party is unpopular, and they have to sit there and make a correct ruling under the law. Now, if they don't, there's malfeasance, there's avenues to address it. But I don't want to start suing judges. I don't think it's warranted. I think it's a slippery slope.
Actually, I wasn't speaking of lawsuits. I was speaking of legislation, the Assembly. If they were to pass legislation that keeps them in the confines of the Constitution when they pass judgment, and if they go out of the confines of the Constitution where they're violating the Constitution in their judgment and legislating from the bench instead, that there's legislation to keep that from happening and to keep the judiciary accountable.
There's already legislation. When the judges take their oath, they're promising to uphold the Constitution. So if they go above and beyond it and they start not following the Constitution, you have your ways to appeal. You appeal to the Supreme Court, and you say my constitutional rights have been violated, and you show how, and hopefully they'll do the right thing. But you don't need a law that says that a judge has to keep within the Constitution and not legislate from the bench. They're not supposed to. There's already the laws on that. So that's why there's avenues to appeal that. I wouldn't go any further when you've already got the avenues. I mean, you'd have to tell me a specific instance where something fell through the cracks, and then we can look at that particular instance and see if there's a loophole in this that I'm not seeing, and take it from there. I mean, I don't have a problem with it in theory. I'm just saying that as a practical matter, it's already that way.
Robert Foust. Annette, can you identify one law that you would like to see changed and that you would move on to repeal it? If you can't, that's fine.
I can identify several laws. There's pros and cons to every type of book club. Let me go to one. How about the no lottery system? I would love to see Nevada engage in a lottery. Right now, the casinos have been very vocal about stopping Nevada from having a lottery because they feel it would compete with the casinos. However, I have several ideas that I think would help the casinos and Nevada in that regard. And I think that the lotteries can be administered by the casinos, with the casinos taking a percentage for administrative purposes. And that would also help us have out-of-state people fund things we want to fund that we don't presently have money for. So I would love to see that change. And I know it has failed in the legislature like 12 times. I know. But there are ways to do it. UNLV just came out with a study on what they recommended would happen to try to get this passed, and I like the idea. So
I understand the no debate rule. We do have a state lottery. It's called Megabucks. That is the state lottery. Can you think of a law that you would like to repeal, not a law that you would like to enact, but a law that's on the books right now that you feel is useless, senseless, it's just there because it's there?
no. I have thoughts on enacting those, but I don't have it on repealing.
Mrs. Toboggan, is there any sort of legislation that you would like to introduce that you feel specifically affects veterans?
Like I said, I would like to see veterans have a choice of going to private providers. I would also like to see Veterans Court expanded. Right now, it deals with DUIs, but I think, and as it turns out, that's only about 15% of veterans crimes. The bigger percentage, it's sex crimes by veterans and property violence against people or property. Certain sex crimes I think should go through Veterans Court. Not rape type issues, but certain other issues may be eligible for Veterans Court. Veterans Court gets to the root of the problem to help the vets so that they don't keep going in and out of jails. And I think the more programs like that we have, the better. And not just for veterans, but for all people. The more we can get to the root of it, the better.
Jay Geraldi, are you for or against decentralizing the Clark County School District as far as providing more discretion to the principal and the teachers to lead the way on how they would like to teach at the campus level and also in the charter school level, and taking some of that management, administrative management from the state and federal level?
I am for it because I think that the group on the ground will know better how they need to spend their funds to get where they need to get. Not to say, however, that it's a free-for-all and you just let the money be managed at that level. I think there has got to be uniformity on the state level, federal levels of what targets have to be hit. And then give some power to the local folks to figure out how to get there in a way that best meets their particular needs. You know, I've gone around the district and I've talked to a lot of people, including a lot of former teachers, and they're saying, oh, it's that administration, they don't understand, but really, if they meet their targets, they should be able to allocate the funds the way they need to at the local level.
So that they have a target now, it's called the Common Core. Do you oppose that, the Common Core, or do you support it?
I have heard nothing good about Common Core. I have not dealt with it personally. That was not part of my growing up or that of my children. And I always look for ways to make things easier rather than harder. And from what I hear, Common Core takes simple math problems and makes them harder. So I would look to having the school make a decision as to whether that is appropriate for their school to hit the target that they need to hit. And with so many complaints on Common Core, I would need to look at it very closely and see whether it's still worth keeping. I don't know enough about it because I haven't used it, so I would need to do that.
Do you have a question?
Mantis Toboggan. Do you think that incarceration is effective for drug crimes? If not, do you think we have enough alternatives and that we use them correctly?
Obviously, there's different kinds of drug crimes. Someone who is dealing at schools and other places where children gather, I think incarceration is just fine. Because that's someone taking advantage of children. If the incarceration is because someone's using cocaine on their own or using a drug on their own, I don't think incarceration is the way to go. I think treatment is the way to go. And very close treatment like they do in drug court, where they say you have to appear here at this time, you have to give blood samples once a week or once every few days, and urine samples, and very close monitored treatment through the courts and mental health facilities is the way to go. But if you've got a drug-related crime that hurts someone else, yeah, incarceration, no excuse. You do what you want to yourself. You know, it's one thing and you can get help for that, but you do it to someone else, inexcusable.
At this time, we would like to ask you to give a 1-minute summary of why you would like to have the Veterans in Politics endorsement.
I have been a fan of veterans in politics for a long time. I represent veterans in politics in court. I believe in the work that you all do and that Steve Sanson does. I believe that the work you do is an uphill battle, and it takes courage and nerves of steel. And I don't see any other organization that has that nerve of steel. I am impressed, and I am all for it. I also believe that Veterans in Politics has done a tremendous amount for veterans, both through the family courts and otherwise. I support our veterans. I was born in Israel, came here when I was 4 years old. My father was part of military police in Israel. I understand where we would be without our veterans, having come from a place in the Middle East that's a democracy surrounded by lack of democracy and chaos. So my debt of gratitude to our veterans is huge. I give back in as many ways, as much as I can as possible. I would love your endorsement, and I would truly support, truly appreciate your support.
At this time, I'd like to thank the panel and the sponsors, Ron Q for Clark County Treasurer, Michael Broadway Real Estate, Real Water, and Lakeside Business Suites. And at this time, that concludes the Veterans in Politics interview for Nevada State Assembly, District 12.